Hey everyone, my name is Eric Bond and I'm one of the co-founders of Hustle Fund. And welcome to today's session, which is called Real Founders Pitch a VC. So I want to bring you back in time to 1997. Look at my face right now. I'm about 39 years old. At the time, I was 16 years old. And I was walking into the movie theater in Detroit, where I grew up. And I was about to sit down and witness a masterpiece of theater called Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery. And at the time when I was 16 years old, I was like, this is like the greatest movie in the world, right? And there's a scene that I love that was, and by the way, this is a spoiler alert. So if you need to close your ears for the next 30 seconds, please do so. Austin Powers has been in cryogenic hibernation for about 30 years. And in the process of thawing, he loses his inner monologue. So basically what that means is extremely obscene things start to spew out of his mouth, particularly directed towards Miss Kensington, his love interest in the movie, the other protagonist. And what we're going to be doing today is mimicking that same cryogenic thawing process with myself, as well as my co-founder, Elizabeth. We're going to remove our inner monologue and listen to three very talented founders that we're going to introduce in just a moment. And provide this kind of real-time feedback, thoughts on the pitch, thoughts on the business, questions that we are having in our mind about their companies, so that you can gain some insight in terms of what venture capitalists are actually thinking when they're reviewing a pitch, to the benefit of the founders who are speaking today, but also to the benefit of you. So that is today's goal. And let's go ahead and look at the agenda. I don't know if it's that important to see. Are we sharing any slides right now? Here we go. Thank you, Kara. So the goal for today on that second slide is we're going to quickly introduce ourselves. We're going to go into the pitches. And then finally, we're going to have a little bit of time, I hope, at the end for question and answer time with you in the audience on feedback for us as the VCs, feedback for the founders as well. So in the next slide, what I want to do is quickly call out the fact that we are not producing today's session in isolation. We're very lucky to be supported by some great partners, namely NetSuite. So NetSuite has been actually sponsoring a few of our webinars on a series around business resiliency and fundraising and scaling of businesses. And they're helping us today. So I wanted to share a few words about what NetSuite is all about. NetSuite gives early stage businesses the confidence to tackle the fundraising process head on. Startups are equipped with real-time financial visibility, KPIs, workflows, dashboards, and reports for the daily strategic planning crucial to improving business performance and attracting investor interest. Not to mention, NetSuite provides all of this on a single cloud-based platform so you can access mission-critical data anytime, anywhere, even during your next pitch. And as someone that represents a portfolio of over 160 companies, I'm proud to say that many of our own portfolio founders have been happy customers of NetSuite for years. So it gives me great pleasure to support NetSuite, and we are so grateful for their support in today's session as well. Okay, let's go to the next slide here and quickly introduce ourselves. So we normally, if this were a real VC meeting with a typical VC, we would spend 40 minutes introducing ourselves with deep insecurity about trying to prove how smart we are to you. Maybe I'll show you a picture of my fleet of Teslas and my home in Petaluma and Monterey, and give you 10 minutes to talk about yourself. But we're not going to do any of that today. Who cares, right? We have myself as well as Elizabeth. We are venture capitalists. That's about it. Okay, let's keep going. Sorry, Elizabeth. I think I'm just going to skip our introduction here. Now, let's talk about how today's pitches are going to happen. So we are going to meet three founders in a moment. Each founder will have roughly 5 minutes to go through her or his pitch. And we'll then spend about 10 minutes where Elizabeth and myself are going to provide some Q&A. As well as some feedback, and maybe we might have a little bit of time to answer some of your questions as well towards the end of our rant session, me and Elizabeth. And so we're going to go through that 3 times, and then again we have a little bit of Q&A, just general Q&As for the very end. If you have questions or feedback that you want to share to the founders, to us at any time, please use that Q&A box at the bottom right-hand side of your Zoom console. That's going to be the best way for us to review that. It's going to be a little bit too difficult given the number of people here who are here today to monitor the chat. So Q&A is really the way that you share feedback. Okay, I think I'm done talking here. And let's go into the pitches. So our first founder today is Nadia, who is going to be introducing her company. Nadia, are you around? Are you here? Can you unmute yourself?
Hey, everybody. So excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to hear your pitch. I have my timer here, roughly 5 minutes. And whenever you're ready, we'd love to hear about your company.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Nadia Simone, and I'm the founder of Blacktina Media. At Blacktina, we amplify Afro-Latinx and Caribbean narratives through digital storytelling, film, and TV. So when I was younger, I never saw myself reflected in media. I'm Panamanian American, and when I saw the Latinx, they weren't Black, and then when I saw Black, they weren't in Latinx. So it was like my family was in a really weird space. You know, they say you're too American for the Latinos, and like in the Selena movie, and too Latino for the Black people. So I created Blacktina to really provide a space. As a writer, director, actor, filmmaker person, I really had the opportunity to do that and create that. I've had films in the Cannes Film Festival. My company to date has been featured in Forbes, New York Times, Oprah's Online Magazine, Vice, and more. We have an international following, and I have like direct connection with my users, with the people who love my content. So I'm raising money to produce a slate of films that are both television, film, and digital media projects, because I have the opportunity, or I guess the privilege of knowing distribution. It's pretty easy since I've created this huge brand. I already know what they want. It's essentially you're putting a round peg in a round hole, instead of like the studios are like, oh, what does the audience want? I don't know. I already know. And you may be thinking like, content, why would we want to like invest in that? Actually, we're consuming like twice as much content due to COVID. And in Hollywood, it's created kind of a content void. So everybody's really nervous about the next 2 years because we've had to stop filming. So as a digital content creator, as a indie filmmaker, I have a lot more power because I can create things on my own and at much in much smaller environments where I don't need studio support and I already know my audience. So that is a little bit about Blacktina. And as far as the numbers, there are 56 million Latinos in the United States, and 24% of those identify as Afro-Latinx. So our business model is essentially producing the content for super, super cheap, and self-distribution and licensing to streaming networks. So Black people and Latinx people over-index on streaming. It's like we just can't get enough of YouTube, Netflix. Like we don't want to watch TV. We're cord cutters. But I also have relationships with people like Fuse, like those smaller, kind of cooler millennial networks that, you know, don't try to force you to do exactly what they want. The issue in Hollywood is that when you're getting money from like the bigger studios, they have a small box of like what they want to talk about. So the issue that I am having when I'm coming to a VC instead of going to like ABC is because in order to keep the content authentic so that it will actually make money, I need to have creative control. So we did. And you know, Oprah knows me. I'm going to be on Hulu. Okay, great. So that is my pitch. That's Blacktina Media. And
yeah, thank you so much, Nadia. So I've been keeping time. You kept it really crisp, which I really appreciate. I'd love to ask a couple clarifying questions about this business. So the first is actually around the market you're trying to serve. So just to clarify, you're targeting Afro-Latinx folks within the United States specifically, or is this actually more of like across the Americas?
across the Americas. So we actually have followers all over the world, even London, France, but it's more about them connecting to the content
Yeah.
and seeing a different way to be Black. Because in our media right now, like the US is put out the most media and the world consumes it. But most of that media, if it's Black, it's like super negative, like we're dying. It's really, really sad. So I'm into like happy media. I just made that word up. And we really just need comedy and lightness, and people really respond to that because it just is not there right now. In the last like 5 years, it's like if you're not watching Insecure, like there's no like happy thing that you can watch, like or we're like dying in slavery or something.
Yeah. Well, I guess like a concern that I have is actually around addressing like how do you create content that is addressable for the entire diaspora, right? So I imagine that like, let's say comedy is a great example, right? Comedy within the United States might have certain contexts that is appropriate. In Panama, it could be really different. In like Venezuela, it could be a little bit different.
In Costa Rica,
So is
absolutely.
there like an issue around like, do you want to create localization of content? Is that the goal, or is it something that's more universal?
The key to being universal is just being super specific. If you are extremely specific, it becomes universal. I know that sounds crazy, but if you're watching like a story about a Vietnamese boy who's like so embarrassed by his family because they're so Vietnamese, he's trying to be American, you being so specific to his story, it's creating a universal. Because at the end of the day, we are all people. We all bleed red. We all want the same things: love, life, pursuit of happiness, Red Bull, so like we want the same things, like, and I think it's not, I think that's kind of the key. So I'm not worried about that. The crazy thing about my business is like I was so surprised because when African Americans started to like really come to our events, and I was like, oh my God, like, and they're like, no, it's just great to see like happy Black stuff and like interesting and new, you never heard about it. And then this year I started to get the most white and like non-Black Latino following, and they were just like, I just am interested in this content. So well, that surprised me.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Okay, here's like the pushback I would have then as a venture capitalist, which is, so our business, we primarily do software. So there's probably a bit of mismatch in terms of what our fund's focus is. But what I like about software is predictability. It's like, when I invest in Nadia's CRM platform or something, it's like a monthly recurring income. I can see it growing either steadily or shrinking or going super fast. When you're going into content, it's in some ways I view Hollywood to be, or even those in media to be kind of similar to venture capitalists. There's a little bit of like taste making. There's a little bit of just like, like where to try to invest your dollars into specific content that you think will break out. So I guess like for me, like in my outer monologue, it's just like, where can I find like the predictability that investing X number of dollars into your business will have some sort of Y outcome?
Okay, and that's a really great question, Eric. If you look at the past like 5 years, maybe you go in the past 10 years, if you look at all the diverse movies, they have grossed the most money. If you look at movies that don't feature women, that don't feature diverse audience, like take Fast and Furious franchise. The only reason it's a franchise and it's making all this money is because it's diverse. That's it. It's not a good movie. It's not special. It's very predictable. It's cars going up. They're flying all over the world. Like, it's just, you get to see the real world. So if you look at the numbers, like that's the predictability. It's like, oh, wait, you have a Black woman, you're going to make money. So you should literally be like, oh, Nadia, Black woman, oh, she's Afro Latinx, so we're going to get that Black audience that's non-Latino, and then we're going to get the Latino audience, which is like over $2 trillion in spending in the United States, and then having access to a global market.
So that's an interesting thesis. So like the representation is a very interesting pull. I would try to sharpen this a little bit though, right? Of just be prepared for this question of just like, there's going to be predictability in terms of just, here's what happens when representation happens, I guess, in film. Like people show up to support that as one component of it. And then like maybe the other part of it could be like, here's my track record of producing content, right? Elizabeth, I want to give you some chance to share some feedback too, or questions.
So I kind of take a structured approach. So with regard to the pitch, I'd say that I kind of felt like you undersold it in some sense. Like I actually, and my strategy around pitching is actually very different from what you might read on the internet about problem, solution, whatever. I think to capture attention, you need to come out punching with the best things. And later on in the pitch, you basically touted your credentials, and I was like, oh my God, like, should have come out with that first. It's like, she's made these amazing movies, she's been at these festivals, and then even later, further down, like something about Hulu and Oprah, which I didn't quite catch. So I would come out actually not even talking about the problem or anything. I would probably come out and say, like, basically, this is me. I produced these films. I've gone to these places, etc. That is like the strongest part of this pitch, especially since this is related to media, right? So that's thought number one, structurally come out punching. Thought number two is around a clarification around what is it that somebody is investing in? Are they investing in the films, or are they investing in some corporation of the overall media company? I didn't quite catch that, and no need for a response, but I would definitely, that to Eric's point actually will change who your investor base is. There are investors who invest in films, and that's a different group of people than people who, let's say, invest in like Netflix. So that's just a thought number two. And they're not VC. It's actually angel investors, like just do like a movie screening, and people who love your past movies or whatever, then at the end it's like, okay, I'm raising money for my new movies. So that's very different from the corporation. And then I think the last piece I would say is around like, what is it that I would want to see as like just a general investor, whether it's VC or not? Like definitely more information around like, how are you thinking about distributing this? I don't think it's frankly good enough to say, well, I've distributed great movies before, because people will always wonder like, how are you going to do it again? And if you do have distribution channels that you have access to, like I have an exclusive with X that has 1 million people or 5 million people or whatever, that's very strong. I couldn't tell whether you have that or not, but more information on how you're going to distribute it, because that's really the crux of it. Like, so those are my general thoughts.
Yeah. Actually, if you're okay, we have question from our aspiring VCs in the Q&A. So I see a question from Divine that I thought was good. It's clarification, actually, which is to Nadia. Are you hoping to sell and license content to Netflix, Amazon Studios, etc.? Is there a specific platform that Afro-Latinx content consumers use?
The top platforms are Netflix, YouTube, Hulu, and Amazon Prime. But Apple Plus is the new one that they actually just went up 24% this year due to COVID. And it's looking like more people will be using that. So that's an option as well.
Awesome. And those would be your primary distribution channels as you build up this content, do you think? Or is it going to be something that's more proprietary?
Yes. Ideally, like what Elizabeth said, like really struck a nerve with me. And I was just thinking of making something a little bit more concrete with Netflix. So for some reason, like I just want to be free. So like, I'm just like, Netflix, let's be on all of them. Like, why do we have to choose now? But if it makes people feel better, it's like, do I get like, okay, Netflix, give me the LOI so I can tell people like it's going to be on Netflix when we're done. And I'm sure that will make people feel much better. But it's just like, I don't want to limit myself to like one platform, you know? So that's why, yeah.
It's a kind of in the weeds question, but I think it's an interesting one. I hope, Nadia, that I think Elizabeth's feedback was so brilliant, which is, in my view, at seed stage, 60, maybe even 70% of what an investor is looking at is the team. So if it's just like one slide, it's just like, look at me, yo. Like how, like the track record speaks for itself, right? Like the expertise speaks for itself. That's almost just like, oh, I might be ready to invest already.
I got feedback that somebody said that my slide about myself was braggadocious. And that really like hit. So I was like, okay, so I thought I had to show why I was the perfect founder, why you're giving me this money. And then he's also a white guy, so maybe he just got $1 million because like he had this great idea. So, but I was just like, aren't you supposed to like tell them how awesome you are and all the things that you've accomplished?
You know, there's a great comment from Pardis, I think. Sorry, if I mispronounced that. which is that's sexist. I actually fully believe that too.
Really?
When it's me bragging about myself and how great I am, people are like, yeah, this guy's confident, he's awesome. When it's Elizabeth doing the exact same thing, they're like, that's a little bit much, right? We've gotten this feedback before. You just be yourself, you are awesome.
I want to jump in on that one, actually, and hi, parties. So this actually applies to everybody, and I think it's worthwhile to chat about. Like, if you get the same piece of feedback from like a couple of people, then maybe it's something to think about. If you get one piece of feedback from somebody, I would just kind of, maybe you think about it, but I wouldn't start changing things right away. Everyone's going to have different feedback on your pitch, etc. And with regard specifically to bragging about yourself, like that is what you need to do when you pitch. Yeah. And I would actually say that having previously run an accelerator where we had people literally from all over the world, I find that actually, there are like certain groups of people, whether it's broken down by gender or geolocation, whatever, who are more afraid to brag. Don't be afraid to brag, because I guarantee all of your counterparts who are going into pitch are bragging. So if you're not bragging, then VCs already are going to discount you 50%. Then oh gosh, like this person really has nothing. So go in.
Well then, because I have a lot to brag about. Like I
sure
created shows on less than $500. So.
Well, thank you so much, Nadia. I just need to watch the clock here and make sure that we give time for our colleagues. This is great. I really appreciate us starting off strong. I feel bad in some ways for Ruchir, our next founder, who has to follow up the amazing Nadia. But Ruchir, you're going to kick some butt here. Are you here right now?
Yeah. Right here.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. And yes, thank you, Kara. We got the slides in front of you whenever you're ready, sir.
Awesome. No, thanks, Nadia. That was actually fascinating. I feel like mine isn't as cool as media, but we're building a hiring platform to reskill trade workers for great jobs. Slide. So our company's actually spent 6 years building a simulator training business in oil and gas. So for the past 6 years, we've trained about 25,000 students at companies including Chevron and BP. And we've made about $2 million bootstrapped through the business. Through these 6 years, we've identified 2 really big problems that we're hoping to tackle with this new vision. Slide. So number 1, skilled trade workers can't reskill effectively. So, for example, we have some oil and gas workers we've trained through our courses who recently got laid off. And these are like exceptional workers with really great mechanical, electrical, safety skills. But some of them are going to work now at a grocery store because they don't have easy access and easy options to reskill for other jobs that are hiring. So all in all, this has led to about a 20% decline in blue-collar income since 1970, as a lot of high-skill jobs have gone away, and those workers haven't reskilled for new jobs, but have just taken unskilled, jobs that are more minimum wage. Slide. At the same time, infrastructure companies, so construction, telecom, oil and gas, they really struggle to assess and hire the right workers. So about 75% of companies can't fill open trade positions, which is a pretty crazy number. And a lot of that is companies trying to recruit people from other industries, and they have no real sense of, if you were like a welder in oil and gas, can you really be a technician in an HVAC role or in a construction role? So they really don't know how to best assess workers moving from different industries. When they do hire people, there's almost a 50% churn rate within the first year. So it's a huge problem. It costs almost $50,000 for the company in lost productivity and hiring costs every time they hire someone incorrectly. So this is about a 2.5 trillion problem over the next 10 years. So it's a huge, huge opportunity. Slide. So we're building a skills-based hiring platform that connects workers and companies together. On the worker end, workers train for free through a simulation bootcamp that replicates real life in a virtual environment on a mobile device. This is a great example of one of the simulation products we've built in oil and gas. So workers skill up and train through all the required job skills. Companies use the simulator as a tool to assess worker skills. We know if you can do a task correctly because we've actually seen you do it in a simulated environment. And then companies hire the best workers through the platform. We take a percentage cut for placing the worker out. Slide. The immediate opportunity that we see is placing a lot of the oil and gas workers we've trained over the years into an industry that is hiring actively right now, even during COVID, and that's HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning technicians. So on kind of building a platform, looking at traction, there are two perspectives. One is getting workers on the platform, and one is getting companies on the platform. From the worker end, we've trained about 25,000 oil and gas workers, and there have been a lot of them that have gone through layoffs. So they're looking at opportunities to reskill and move to a new area. And just inbound through our online safety and other courses, we get about 250 workers a week. We've built out a basic MVP of a hiring platform where workers can take training, and then it assesses them on their skills for HVAC. And then we have 3 HVAC hiring partners signed up and committed to hiring our workers once they go through our program. To kind of cap all of this off, in September, we're planning a virtual HVAC career fair where you have to go through our platform to participate. So we're really excited about where we're at and what we're building. Slide. I think one of the strongest things we bring to this problem is our team. So I'm Ruchir, I'm the founder. I have an engineering degree, and I spent really my entire professional career, I've spent training skilled trade workers through this company. I recently got my MBA with a lot of courses on computer science and AI at Stanford, and kind of coming back to the business to grow it after that. Akash is our head of our India-based product team, which is really exceptional. And so we have a really great teams of developers and product managers that have been able to build online animated courses and simulators for many years across a couple different industries. And then we have these 2 new hires, Eric and Matt, who are probably both watching right now. So shout out to them. They're really great and have kind of been hired in the last couple of weeks to launch out into construction and HVAC. Eric is a former entrepreneur who's leading our biz dev and marketing efforts, doing a lot of really great cold calling to get HVAC hiring companies signed up. And Matt is a former technician who worked as an electrician and a construction project manager who also has a lot of teaching experience. So he's bridging those 2 gaps as our lead content creator. Slide. So we're profitable right now, and we're moving quickly towards this vision. We're looking to raise money so we can move faster and more aggressively. And so we're raising a $1.5 million seed round so we can scale up and place 1,000 workers across 3 verticals, which would give us about $3 million in recurring revenue to then raise a Series A. I think I'm under time, so that's all I have. Thank you.
Actually, you're over time, but that's okay. We'll just have a little bit less time for Q&A.
Okay.
Great work, Ruchir.
Thank you.
Let me tell you what I did not like, but it's solvable. Okay. I'm going to deliver hard feedback in the most loving way possible. It's your team slide. So I want to carry over the comment that Elizabeth had from the previous slide, which is so much of the decision-making at this stage at seed is directed on the team. What is the potential around this team? And you are deeply, deeply underselling how great you are. I mean, I didn't see any logos of the schools you went to, the businesses you worked at, the skills that you possess. It is the most dramatic undersell. So this has to be the strongest slide, and it needs to be positioned basically right after your title slide.
Okay.
So I wanted to share that specific piece of feedback because it's very correctable, and that's something I definitely noticed. Elizabeth, I want to actually start off with some of the comments on your end first before moving to mine.
Yeah, let's build on that. So along the lines of, coming out punching. So in addition to team, I mean, you already have traction, right? You did $2 million in revenue bootstrap. And while you did mention that, I think you can really hype that up. I don't know if you have an up to the right kind of graph to better illustrate that, but if you're using slides, I think you can. And I was actually kind of confused because you never later talked about how many customers you had. I think in the end you kind of slid in, you have 1,000 workers. I think somebody in the Zoom chat mentioned there was no discussion of, business model or any of the actual business aspects of this. So I would just in front, like your money slide, in addition to your team, is like whatever that graph looks like. We're already, kicking ass and have 1,000 workers. Separate from that, I think lots of questions, even just going back to the business model comment, like you mentioned 25,000 workers, but who pays? They pay, the companies pay. Is this a recurring thing? Like nothing like that. And investors will back into their own heads on the market size based on that, but not able to do that. And then I think a recurring theme for all pitches that I see is around customer acquisition. Like you obviously have some sense of how you're acquiring customers today, but you didn't chat about that at all. And that I think almost
5 minutes is tough. Yeah.
What?
5 minutes was tough. I cut a lot, so maybe I didn't cut the right things. Yeah.
5 minutes is easy. I used to have my founders do it in 2.5 minutes. So here's my pitch to you. I'm Rescale. We did $2 million with this business. This is what our revenue looks like today. We charge X thousand dollars per worker. They pay. I'm making this up. And we already have 1,000 workers. We're going to scale up to 25,000 in the next round with 1.5 million. And we know how to get them by doing A, B, and C. Done. That's it. That's all I care about. I don't care about your simulation or how you're doing the training or anything like that. Those are details that nobody really cares about.
Yeah, I'll throw one more thing on top of that pitch too. I'd be like, COVID has been next level for us. Not celebrating the fact that people are getting sick or that we're going through a pandemic that's a disaster for the economy and hurting families. But you guys actually have a virtual platform for retraining, right? Which means that those who are displaced now have an option to work through you. Therefore, you have this like anti-fragile moment, right? Where you can capture so much of these workers and help these families and so forth, right? So I might add that kind of like icing on the cake as well on top of what Elizabeth did very well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay. Well, let's see if we could take a question or we have maybe time for one question from the audience here. I'm looking at the Q&A. Kara, I don't know if you had one that you were sort of tracking that would be really good to pose to Ruchir.
Yep. Okay. There's one in particular that I thought might be interesting, Ruchir. Mm-hmm. Josh is asking, there's a ton of government programs to support worker retraining, and they tend not to work very well. Do you have any reason why this company is going to be more successful?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So we've studied a lot about community colleges, and so the traditional way that workers reskill and get placed into new jobs is through community colleges. And we've worked with a lot of them in the oil and gas world, and they work really well for small groups of people. But most workers can't take a year or two out of their life to get out of like a full-time job and just take that out to train. And workers, especially older workers, don't want to go back to school. There's a huge mental block against ever doing that. So we're envisioning our boot camp is like a 1 or 2 week kind of crash course and everything you need to know to get started on the job. And you do the rest of it online, digitally, through a mobile device or online while you're actually working. So we can get you as quickly as possible from one job to another without having 1 or 2 years of downtime. We have to go to a classroom with an instructor or handle a very, very long time without getting paid. So I can share a lot more on that if anyone wants to contact me after.
Awesome. Well, Ruchir, really, really grateful for your introduction of SkillCat. Thank you so much for the going through the ringer with me and Elizabeth, as well as our audience as well.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the feedback.
Yes, of course. All right. So in the cleanup position, we have a gentleman named Clark. Clark, are you there? Can you hear us?
Hey, yeah.
Hey, hello. Thank you so much. If you're ready to go, we'd love to hear your pitch and provide some feedback.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I don't know if people noticed, but I dropped in the middle of this call and hustled to get right back on. So if I drop again, just pretend I pitched the next Facebook or something like that. Okay. All right. So I see my slides are up. I'm here to pitch for RedderFit, which strengthens your critical thinking skills. Next slide. And so to set the stage for this pitch, I think that today we argue with each other. But in the future, there are going to be robots that argue for us. And Retrofit is going to build those robots. Next slide. So a couple observations. Arguing is hard, right? If you're a professional arguer, AKA a lawyer, you come out of a T14 law school, you go to New York for your first big law job, and you start making a lot of money after a couple years of education. And that's because arguing is complicated and people who do it well are well remunerated. However, it's also really fun, especially when you win arguments. And it's addictive, right? You see that on social media. People love to argue with each other. They can't stop arguing with each other. And to tie in the technical piece here, natural language processing is really advancing at a rapid pace. I'm going to talk about GPT-3 a little bit during this presentation, but currently we don't have good data sets for training something that would work like an argument as a service, something that would just argue for you, a robot that would argue for you. So Retrofit's going to be about building that data set. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Perfect. Right there. So our solution, imagine two different parts to the solution. On the left, you have a free app for users. It's like Duolingo, but instead of learning Italian, you're learning how to argue better. Now, what's happening under the hood is you're providing training data for a service that feels like Grammarly, but it's not to make sure you use the right form of to or the right form of there. It's to make sure that when you're responding to an argument, you're doing a good job. So either improving your arguments or finding flaws in opponents' arguments. Next slide. This is what it would look like for the customer-facing end. It might be a little bit difficult to see, but I've basically got lorem ipsum up. And you could imagine that if you're looking at someone else's argument, or if you're looking at your own argument, Retrofit would automatically find areas where you could improve the argument, or if it's someone else's argument, counter the argument. Next slide. Now, in order to do this, we're going to need a great data set. Some relatively unsophisticated models have done a great job of doing some really cool things when it comes to natural language processing, but we need something to transfer learn on. We can't just use GPT-3. And so this is going to be trained by real users that want to engage with this addictive app that lets them find problems with other people's arguments. Next slide. Reiterating, how do we argue today? Well, it's incredibly slow, expensive, and error prone, right? You either go through law school or philosophy classes, or you teach yourself. Maybe you participate in some niche internet community. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to get good at arguing, it takes a long time and it's hard. Next slide. So why is this a good idea to do right now? On the left, you have trends in AI. The latest GPT-3 AI model is a relatively unsophisticated learning model, but it's just massive, both in terms of parameters and trained on a big data set. And it does some really amazing stuff. So we think AI is at the right point right now where we could do something like this. And on the right is something kind of similar to a TAM. We've got the latest valuation for Grammarly, which we see of not as a competitor, but as a very similar kind of model. People want to have better grammar. They also want to have better arguments. Next slide. So progress so far. This is in a lot earlier stage than the previous two startups. We first checked that something like this didn't already exist. So we posted on a couple different forms of social media and blogs and forums that are interested in arguing, and found that there was nothing like this that existed. Then we sent out a SurveyMonkey survey to some of these really small communities. Got over 200 responses, which is a lot for these small things. Overwhelmingly positive, lots of email addresses to have early users. And so we built the first release of the app Retrofit. And we're currently at the point where we're onboarding one technical collaborator and two content creation collaborators. Last slide. And that's me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And right at 5 minutes too, on the money. So I got to start by discussing the opener, which I thought was fascinating, which is robots are going to argue for you in the beginning. And that's the kind of initial hook that I think is super solid for elevator pitch for any pitch that you do. So that's well done. I'm going to sort of like give you the mindset, the persona of a VC. A couple things you should assume. They're not smarter than you. I'm actually on the smarter end of VCs, I think. And that's not that smart, right? Like that, like we're very kind of, like we're not that smart. So I have some feedback around that too with regard to like more technical things. But when you can like begin with like a mediocre smart VC who is also a little bit lazy, like they're already going through tons and dozens of pitch in the given week, it's very easy to quickly fall into the trap of just typecasting. It's like, oh, it's like Duolingo for blah, blah, blah. It's like, I've seen like 15 other versions of this. But when you can create that kind of curiosity statement like this, that is both like horrifying and fascinating, of like robots are going to handle all of our arguments in the future. And I'm actually building that now like puts me in like a zone where I like want to function in my neocortex to get some higher level rationalization and expend more energy to actually think about this. So that opening statement I thought was very well done. That's just a comment. The thing though that actually, just bringing it back to like why VCs aren't that smart, is like I had no idea what the hell you're talking about when you're discussing GPT-3. You may want to actually, depending on the audience, if it's a more technical VC you can skip that. But for us, like you may want to sort of outline that like, this is like consider like a best in class library for training on like rhetoric and argument or something. You reference it a couple times, but it was really confusing to me. So that's something that I want to call out here too. Other than that, like I think my last comment, which has to do with like the one aspect of the business. So this is an example of a company that I think is really indexing hard on differentiated technology more so than distribution at this point. And that might be okay. At our fund at Hustle Fund, we actually almost take the opposite approach when it comes to the businesses that we're interested in. It's like the technology has to be there. We want to see some level of differentiation, but distribution is something that we are really eager to see, which is like a founder that has a mindset on how this can be on everyone's machines, like everyone's top of mind app or whatever. So I generally don't subscribe to the idea of like, if I build it and it's the greatest, they will come. There are some models where that has been true with certain kinds of apps, but this was actually the area of the deck that I thought was the weakest, which is just like, do you have at least some early thinking in terms of like the distribution channels? You mentioned some, but maybe there's like B to B to C relationships, like work through the Duolingos, work through some of these like Grammarly kind of channels that already have captured audience, where it makes sense to layer on maybe something around rhetoric and argumentation. Yeah. Elizabeth?
So I think Ashley asked this question, which was top of mind. How are you going to make money on this? I really did not understand that. And this goes for everyone. I mean, I think one of the challenges here is you're pitching a business, you're not pitching a product. And there's a big distinction there, because everyone wants to know, how are you going to make money? And then the other side of the coin that I've mentioned in the last two pitches is like, how are you going to get users? And basically you need those two numbers to align, right? You need to get people for less than how much money you make. And neither of those things are addressed, and definitely needs to be addressed here. I think to Eric's point, the only kinds of companies that can get away with not talking about distribution are companies where it's an absolute life or death product. For example, if you are coming up with a new cancer drug, then people don't care about your distribution. They care about whether your drug is effective. But for pretty much everyone else, like if your product is not life or death, I think that is really what you need to structure your pitch around. And I think stemming off of that, even when you talk about, training on data sets, other questions along the lines of technology and training came to mind. I think just as a vast generalization for a lot of companies that need to train their models, you need your data sets to be relatively specific, in that it needs to be a somewhat specific use case to train well. So I had question marks around what is really the use case that people will pay for here. And then therefore, that's the data set that you need to get. It's not just everybody arguing under the sun about whether donuts or cookies are better versus, I don't know, arguments about euthanasia, right? Like they're very different kinds of conversations and writing. And that, I think then your product like stems from thinking about all that. So those are kind of my high level thoughts. The last one is around, there was really no information about you and why you're qualified to do this. I'm sure actually you're quite qualified to do this, but I think again, to the point about coming out punching with like things that are strengths, would have liked to have seen more around that.
Yeah, so I'd actually like to expound about one more thing related to my previous comment on distribution and why this matters. So here's a little bit of context of when you're pitching an emerging manager fund like ourselves. Me, Elizabeth, Kara, we run Hustle Fund, which is considered a micro fund. So our assets under management is about $40 million. That sounds like a lot, but it's actually tiny in the scheme of most venture capital firms. And this context actually really matters because in these kinds of scenarios, Clark, or those who are actually indexing on like game-changing introductions of technology, oftentimes those are things that require a lot of money to underwrite before you can see like the business model later on. Like think of like Google, you know, like in the beginning, it took probably a ton of money raised in order to underwrite this like search engine algorithm. And once they hit that critical mass later on with millions of users, like, yeah, they could layer on ads and so forth. That's a really expensive proposition. So if we were to put in some money, let's say into this business, and there are, by the way, other micro funds too that focus on like longer term kind of deep tech like this. So they found other models to make this work. But in our case, if we were to put in some money, we would have to understand that there could be millions and millions and millions of dollars raised that'll be necessary before you hit your critical mass where this becomes like a $1 trillion business over time. And that means to us is like for businesses that can't monetize as quickly or don't have as clear a business model and distribution model on the outset, our position will be diluted down really quickly into an ownership that is so low that it'll be very difficult for us to mathematically return capital back to our own investors. So when you're talking to like a smaller assets under management VC fund, like a Hustle Fund, it's important to know, I think, a few things. One is just like, do they make deep tech bets? Because that means that they have modeled out the ability to justify these kinds of investments early on, or do they not? I guess that's like the binary. It might be a little bit different when you're pitching a multi-stage fund, right? Those that like invest in seed, Series A, Series B, because they generally have a lot of pooled capital that they can reserve for you to underwrite and support your journey so that you can just focus on the great R&D and distribute this thing later on. And then the other thing, I guess, at this stage that I'd really index towards is angels. You know, like those that are investing off their own bank accounts, balance sheets. They're really in it for the vision. They don't have like a 10-year return structure that most VC funds have. Maybe they can be also really strategic. So Clark, I know that you go to MIT right now. You didn't mention this, I think, in the slides really very clearly. There's a ton of these kinds of like great advisors, right? In very close proximity to you that have not just the money, but also advisory kinds of benefits as well to you. So this is like a nuance that I never understood until I became a venture capitalist when it comes to fund returned outcomes and ownership structure. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if we have time for at least one question from the audience here. Kara, you've been taking a look?
Yeah. Clark, this is something Elizabeth touched on, but I'd love to see if you want to approach it. How are you expecting to acquire new users?
That's a great question that I don't have a ready-made answer for. I've been focusing more on the users than the customers part because I think I'm not sure if there's something that people would pay for just yet. I need the data first. And users I have thought about how to acquire. There are a lot of small niche internet communities that are interested in this kind of thing, and they're already starting to use the free mobile app that sort of generates training data. But yeah, to go back and answer the question, I haven't thought too much about how to acquire paying customers yet.
So can I just ask one quick follow-up, Eric, then that might potentially help Clark think about this? So a lot of people are asking a question, roughly question. Are you trying to train people how to win an argument or be a better communicator or be a better negotiator?
I think it is not to win an argument. That's probably framed in a little bit like too adversarial a context, but to produce content that is better thought out, to respond to content by winning the argument, right? But more by responding to content with a more logically thought out, more logically complete argument, as opposed to just responding with an ad hominem, like, no, that's dumb. You're dumb. Your argument is dumb.
Okay, thank you.
I hear that a lot from my son these days. The ad hominem attacks. Well, Clark, thank you so much. Great work with walking us through this really exciting company. I'm definitely gonna be checking this out. I need to find ways of arguing better with Kara because she's very convincing. So thank you for that. And also thank you for the questions from the audience as well. So we got a little bit of time left here. And what we wanted to do next was so you've heard a founder talking about her media business. You've heard another founder talking about a marketplaces training platform. And you just heard another founder talking about kind of a more future tech like AI software. So a pretty good diversity of businesses, some themes that were probably common that you heard as well in terms of feedback from Elizabeth and myself. But we want to open it up now for taking a couple questions from you. So if you had questions for either me or Elizabeth or the founders who are on the call, we'd love to field them. And actually to assist us with that too, Kara, I don't know if you saw some patterns here that we can begin to answer.
I did, and I'm sorry, I just shared my screen. I'm gonna stop sharing it again. I'm sorry if I'm making you guys dizzy because I wanna make sure that I have the Q&A open. So yeah, big thanks to everyone for pitching today. Let's field some questions to Eric and Elizabeth. And panelists, if you're able to access the Q&A, you also will see some questions to you. So feel free to go ahead and type your responses if you'd like. Okay, Michelle is asking, is the first intro pitch to an investor usually 5 minutes long? Is it also usually with slides or without slides?
I can take that one. So actually, this confused me a lot when I was an entrepreneur. I thought that a pitch was you go up and you stand in front of a conference room and you kind of give a presentation. It's actually not like that. A real pitch with an investor would be a conversation. It might be a conversation over a phone call. It could be 20 minutes long. It could be an hour long. If it usually is set for 20 minutes and then you end up going to an hour, that's usually a good sign. It means the investor was interested enough to talk with you longer. The only time when it's like a 5-minute pitch is if you are in an accelerator and you're doing like a demo day presentation.
I would add to that a little bit, which is I try to design all of our pitches to be about 5 minutes because we pretty much know within a couple minutes let me set context. We fundraise a lot too with our fund. We're constantly fundraising our next fund and so forth. So I take a lot of pitches and I pitch all day long. And you can tell within the first few minutes whether you're on the right track, right? You know, you can, and what I really like about the Zoom format now that it's sort of the norm is it gets a little bit easier to detect what the face reactions are. You know, if someone's yawning, that's obviously a bad sign. And that happens a lot with my pitches too. But, you know, as you start to see like different kinds of facial tics, like, oh, I mentioned, you know, this aspect of of our products, you know, this seems to be lighting up this person. Let's keep going down that track. That's something that, you know, you can get a sense of within the first few minutes. To give a shout out to Nadia, and by the way, like everyone did a great job today and pitching with slides is awesome, but I actually prefer Nadia's version of pitching. When you're going, especially in the first meeting with a VC, just be like, hey, I got slides prepared, but is it okay if we just like talk like people like this and I can just have a conversation with you? That actually does two things. One is it makes it a little bit easier for you to detect, you know, look at the faces and see what the reactions are, if they're poker facing or not. But the second thing too is, wait, there was a second thing, right? I felt like there's another point. I have like such crazy dad brain right now. Maybe that's the only point, but like I really love, I remember now. It's actually the power leverage. So like one of the things that's a little bit weird, I don't know if you've noticed this, is like when you're presenting a deck and like, you know, you're kind of looking back and forth to see whether the person's paying attention or not. And you got this other dude on the other side who's just like, yeah, okay. Like it just feels like an unbalanced power dynamic, right? But when you're talking and conversing like this, it just sets, I think, a different kind of tone that there's even power, which is like we're speaking as peers right now. right? And it's nuanced, but I think it does matter on edges when it comes to your success or closing a little bit later. So I challenge you all to think about doing a face-to-face pitch as well.
One thing I want to interject with, though, is if you're going to do that, you should absolutely know your talking points, because the conversation can sometimes meander and you may not actually hit everything you need to.
Okay, thank you guys. We have a couple minutes left. Let's see if we can get through a few more. Is runway relevant in a pre-seed round?
It's not absolutely critical. A VC may ask, in which case you should have that in mind.
Okay, great. A couple people are asking, Elizabeth, if you can review that sort of perfect pitch under 5-minute format that you mentioned when Ruchir was pitching.
So just a couple of things to keep in mind. One, come out with your strongest point. If you don't know what the strongest point is about your business, whether it's your team or your traction or whatever, ask a friend. I'm sure your friend will be able to tell you. So that's thought number one. Capture attention immediately with that. Thought number two is, for pretty much any software or software related business like e-commerce or whatever, your biggest risk is around whether this is a business. It's not about your product. And so make sure that you hit all the business points, like how are you going to get customers? What are you charging? And, do you have any proof points around testing that? And that's how you should frame your story. Make sure that you brag about the things that are actually great about you as people. And if you have traction or notable customers, make sure to mention that as well.
Okay, thank you. Also, we're recording this, so you guys can listen to that again later. 2 more really quick points of clarification. One, Clark in his pitch compared his company to Grammarly. Is that something you would recommend or recommend against?
That's a question for us?
Yes.
It's a pretty interesting way of anchoring at least some sort of anchoring the concept, because Clark, I've never seen anyone actually go after what you're trying to build. So for lazy thinking, I really do like it. But the more that I heard your pitch, the more ambitious it sounds than what Grammarly is going after. But I actually liked it. That was my take.
Okay, we're basically at time, so I'm gonna cut my last question, and we'll try and include it in email later.
No worries. Kara, do you mind flashing our very last slide here?
Not at all.
Okay. Well, Nadia, Ruchir, and Clark, thank you again for the fabulous job in pitching, sharing your vision with us. We hope that the questions and feedback that we shared is going to help you and accelerate you in your journey, and that you'll find tons and tons of success, not just in fundraising, but of course in building out these great companies. Big thank you for that. And I'd like to also thank our audience as well. There was a ton of signups, over 1,100 people for today's session. So very much appreciate your taking time out of your busy day to join this Zoom. There are many Zoom choices that you have probably at this point, and you selected this one. So thank you for that. And of course, the last thing that we want to call out was our awesome partners at NetSuite for allowing this session to happen today. We're so grateful to have you as partners. Encourage everyone here to check out netsuite.com to take a look at those awesome offerings. So please be well, be successful, and most importantly, be safe in this period, and wishing everyone well. Thank you.